It's like 7 p.m. We are still walking. We are not going to make it where we wanted to camp today, despite doing 9 miles in under 3 hours and hoofing it. I'm just beat up. Literally been hiking for 6 hours and 13 minutes and 16 and a half miles. So that's nice. Woof. In today's video, we're taking a close look at one of backpacking's most tried and true rules. Your total pack weight shouldn't exceed 20% of your body weight. Myth, must do, or meh, doesn't really matter. We're going to answer all that and more. I'm Meg Atterbury, an ex-professional outdoor writer, and I'm diving into the science behind your favorite backpacking mantras. I want to know what's fact and what's really, well, fiction. Today is extra special because I am diving into a backpacking rule sent by one of my subscribers. If you have a backpacking concept you want dissected, give me a shout in the comments down below. So what is the deal with this 20% weight rule, and where does it come from? There are a few major flaws with this concept that your pack weight shouldn't exceed 20% of your body weight. Number one, there are a lot of different body types that simply can't make that rule work. Petite people genuinely struggle to keep things below 20%. I see it all the time on female backpacking forums and discussions. Where on the flip side, I've seen people who've decided that since they can technically haul 50 pounds, they will try and fail very miserably. And me? Well, I'm an alpine climber, avid desert backpacker, and budding canyoneer. I break that 20% rule all the time. So what gives? Am I doing my body tons of harm by going over 20% of my body weight? And how important is your overall pack weight when it comes to injury prevention and feeling less fatigued on the trail? And if not, what are the most important factors to consider when you're forced to handle a heavier load? Today's results were super interesting. One of the biggest revelations might change the way you backpack forever. You might be doing this one thing completely wrong. I know that I was.
Huh?
I'm diving deep. I'm explaining it like you're 5 and leaving all of my research in the show notes, so check it out if you need the data. However, this time I'm going to be doing something a little different. You're going to be hearing from a pro on the topics of body mechanics and injury prevention. That's right, folks. The doctor is in the house. But before we chat with our special guest, let's dive into a little background information. I looked high and low from where this 20% rule came from. And as a shocker to no one, especially if you've been on this channel for a little bit, there is no single study that states that this is an ideal ratio to aim for. One important thing to know is most of the studies adapted for backpacking come from the US military. The military has put quite a bit of money behind finding out just how to be efficient while carrying weight by foot. It's kind of an important part of what they do. So the U.S. Army Research Institute of Environmental Medicine states that loads above 30% of your body weight significantly increase injury risk and metabolic cost. Their official recommendation is 25 to 30% is manageable for fit soldiers over short durations. But they don't define short, and they don't define fit either. If you're looking for an in-depth discussion about metabolic costs, then definitely check out my base weight myth video. 30% is a substantial amount of weight, and many folks are just fine staying below that ratio for an average backpacking trip, especially beginners or budget conscious hikers who may not have the money to fork over for all that Dyneema and fancy ultralight gear. There are a few important things to keep in mind when you think about that 30% ratio. You have to remember, most backpackers really aim for 1.5 pounds or 0.7 kilograms of food per day, and water weighs a whopping 2.2 pounds or 1 kilogram per liter. This weight can quickly add up on a week-long trip, especially with your food, and even more so if you've got to carry the dreaded bear can. So that 20% can be really tough because it's not just your base weight, it's including everything else that you're carrying. Meanwhile, the Spine and Gait Posture Journals had a study that found that 15 to 20% will begin to alter posture and gait mechanics. These are key components in stress injuries, and our expert is going to talk to us in depth about what you can do to counterbalance that. Lastly, a 2010 study in Applied Ergonomics found that even acceptable loads, whatever that means, significantly increase physiological stress over multiple days. So, what does this all mean? First, there is no real constant between any of these studies. There are a lot of vague terminologies like significant, long, or short, even fit. And these things can really mean different things to different people. Oftentimes, studies really do a poor job at naming and controlling parameters. Oddly enough, my high school science class taught me that's the antithesis of what they're supposed to be doing. But here we are. So it's easy to think that these studies can be a be-all, end-all, but the deeper the dive you do, you realize that there is usually an entire spectrum to work with. Although there is no real true point of origin for this rule, which automatically puts it into the sus pile for me, my spidey senses are telling me that this 20% figure was born from a conglomeration of the studies I just mentioned. And it becomes a concept that's something to consider, but it is clear from the get-go that it is not a hard and fast rule. But does that make it a myth? I decided to call in an expert. And to be clear, I am not a medical doctor or a physical therapist. But I happen to know someone who is and has a doctorate in physical therapy. So I invited her to weigh in. Our discussion opened up a huge Pandora's box. We as backpackers love to obsess over our pack weight, but the truth is we should be obsessing over something completely different. So if you would just want to take a minute and introduce yourself, tell me a little bit about what you do, what your expertise is, and why you are interested in the outdoors.
Sweet. Yeah. Thanks for having me on the show. I'm excited. I'm Dr. Erin Lee, but you can call me Erin. And I'm a physical therapist and founder of the Training Lab. So that's a physical therapy gym, kind of a hybrid facility in Denver, Colorado. So what I do is actually kind of right up the alley of this conversation is we work a lot on getting people ready for whatever their goal is. Typically it's an athletic goal. And then on the other side, with the physical therapy side, it's injury prevention, rehabilitation. If I'm hiking and I have a nagging injury, how do we problem solve that?
And if you've been following the channel for a while, you may recognize Erin. We did the 4 passes loop together.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
Yeah, and kind of a fitting conversation because you worked through an injury on that adventure. Do you want to explain that story really quick?
Yeah, sure. I think we were probably 5 miles into the 4 pass loop and I slipped off the side just running downhill because I'm clumsy sometimes. Rolled my ankle and I was trying to make a decision whether to keep going or to be done. I decided to just kind of muscle through it, and I thought it would be good practice. I'm kind of a little psycho like that. I like to really understand what people go through in terms of injuries. So I was like, well, this will be a good practice for me to see what the body can handle by the end of the run.
How would you approach, as a physical therapist and a professional in this space who works with athletes, how should you be thinking about pack weight when it comes to feeling fatigued and obviously preventing joint injuries or something dangerous happening out there?
You'll hear this a lot from me. It depends. It depends on physically how capable someone is and what they're comfortable with. If you're a smaller framed individual and you're doing a couple of days of backpacking, how can you strategize what effectively works for your body versus sticking to a number and weighing your bag and being a little bit too dogmatic? So there's two parts that we got to think about. You have your cardiovascular system, and then you have your skeletal muscular system, just in a very simple sense. So a lot of people tend to think, well, I'm really fit because my cardio is really good, right? But then they forget that running or just like walking without incline or decline is one thing, and then hiking at altitude with different terrains requires your muscles and your bones to really be able to tolerate load. And then also on the other side of that, what you're doing outside of your trip, right? Are you doing strength training? Are you doing trail running? What kind of cross training are you doing to kind of prepare your body for the day to day? Because unless we're talking about professionals, most people were sitting 8 hours a day, right? If you're not active every day, you're not microdosing the load, and then you just jump into a big backpacking trip. Things are going to show up whether you have a light pack or not. So yeah.
That's really great advice. In your professional opinion, what is really going to be more important, that fitness piece or the weight of your bag, if we keep everything else the same?
It's a balance. I would definitely say if we're talking about fitness in the sense of we're considering the two components, the heart and the muscles, I would say probably that is a bigger factor than the weight specifically, right? Because someone who has done this, if we want to go back to the military again, right? If someone who's done this constantly for training, so the more you've trained, the more you're fit, they're going to be able to tolerate more load. They're going to be able to tolerate more variances because their body has adapted, versus someone who's done it once a year. They're a little bit more fragile in that sense of sensitivity to different changes. The fitter you are, I always just like to say, like, it just bulletproofs your body. Finding a bag that fits is probably arguably more important than
what's inside
the distribution.
All right, so we're already dismantling this idea that your pack absolutely needs to be below 20% of your body weight, and that fitness is going to play a much bigger role in how you feel on the trail. But what can we do to drastically reduce the load we are experiencing, especially if we really aren't quite where we want to be with the weight of our pack, or we're going on a longer trip that might be stretching our limits a little bit? What is actually going to impact your experience over multiple days on the trail? The answer lies in a single piece of gear that I think everyone should be carrying.
Your body's job is two things, right? It's always orienting to safety and making sure that it's protecting the brain, it's protecting the guts, and balance, if we think about it this way, right? It's every time you tip this way, it's trying to counteract to the other way, and we call that rotational forces. But in addition to that, if you have hiking poles and if you're hiking with the poles up and down, that actually changes your base of support. It widens your base of support, so now you have less of a need to work on your balance as you're going, so that therefore then result in less rotational strain on your body.
Okay, so when you say base of support, can you break that down just a little bit further?
You're just standing, feet are narrow, and someone pushes you and you tip. If your center of mass moves outside of your base of support, so this is your base of support, if it goes this way, right, you're going to fall. Mm-hmm. So that's a narrow base. If you have a wider base and your center of mass is here, it takes a lot more, right, to tip you out. So then you think about hiking, right? Your base of support is basically your stance, your width. Sometimes it's a little narrower, sometimes a little wider. But now you add in the two poles. Now you have this way bigger base of support. So it takes way more to fall out of that, so to speak. And therefore, your muscles don't have to work as hard to keep you upright. So it's energy conservation. The reason that people have pack fatigue or aches and pains in certain areas is because the muscles and your skeletal system is like, I can't tolerate this load anymore. Your form's degrading. So one of the ways to help your body tolerate more is to offload it a little bit. And so ways of doing that is widening your base of support through pulls. So that's one part about hiking pulls. And then it also helps offload your joints, especially in deceleration phases, downhills, uneven terrain, where your muscles have to work really, really hard to slow you down so that you don't fall again, right? So with the pulls, now you're offloading some of that force put into the ground in front of you or beside you. So that then is more energy efficient, which then in the long run saves you. If our battery level is here, and without hiking poles, you'll drain much faster. With the poles, it's just a little bit slower.
So from a form perspective, what are you thinking about when you have these poles?
But general rule of thumb is you still want to maintain an upright torso, right? So if you're here and you add the poles and now you have to lean forward, now you have your pack weight. Now you're tipping forward. So like now you're changing your lever arm. So now it's going to be heavier again, right? So you want to find the height that keeps you as upright as possible. Obviously, the terrain changes. Generally, I would say arms are about a little bit below 90 degrees is a pretty comfortable, people walk this way, it's pretty comfortable. Some people like that. Some people like it a little bit higher, but you just don't want it super low where you're like reaching forward. So kind of play around with what feels comfortable for you. If you really wanted to geek out, you could change it for an incline versus a decline. I think sometimes people forget that the terrain you're on is changing, so you also have to respond to the terrain you're on.
Erin's excellent explanation about hiking poles is backed by real data. In fact, the strongest study I found in my quest to understand more about the 20% weight rule didn't come from pack weight at all. It came from studying the use of hiking poles. In a 1999 study by the Journal of Sports Sciences, poles were found to reduce the compressive forces on the knees by 12 to 25%. That is huge. Meaning if you're using poles and you're a bit above that 20% weight limit, the poles are handling that additional weight for you. Now, this isn't an excuse to pack 5 cast iron skillets the next time you go backpacking, but it's a really important tool that is doing so much more than just making you look like a backpacker. As someone who's been backpacking for 20 years, the use of poles is not a revolutionary concept to me, but the other equally impactful thing you can do is choose the right footwear. You may have found my channel from my mega rant on footwear. Check it out up here. So I was thrilled to ask a few questions about what Erin thought regarding my concept. Her take on footwear is particularly impactful because your foot is one of the most fascinating mechanical systems in your entire body.
If you're thinking about longer mileage, more wear, you probably want to have a shoe that is not the heaviest, but it's sturdy enough to get you through the terrain and the weather. If I'm doing a longer trail, I probably want a little bit more padding, but it still has to be stable. And I want the padding because same thing we talked about earlier, energy efficiency. I want to be able to use all my tools to absorb the load so that my body's not doing that, right? I think the stability of the shoe is really important. A lot of times you're trading stability for cushion, right? Let's kind of go back to the function of the foot first.
Yeah.
Your foot has multiple bones, a couple muscles, if I'm just keeping it very simple. The foot is actually one of the most interesting parts of the body because at certain positions, it gets really rigid. And then at certain positions, it's very pliable. So when you first step down, it's actually super pliable. You actually pronate and it adapts to the surface you're on. And then once you load it, you supinate, and that's when you have your arch that forms. And that in itself becomes rigid to push you off. That's the issue with the shoes. It's so hard to find shoes that could do both things, right? And the foot is just amazing at what it can do. And that's why we can do so much.
So if we look at this whole system, you have your bag, you have the footwear that works for you, whatever that is. How does having a pack weight really affect that transfer throughout the body?
Let's simply put, like going downhill, right? If you're going downhill without any weight, that's one thing. You just have to manage your body weight downhill. If you're going downhill with a pack weight, now you have to manage that load on your body as well, right? I think partially why people get really stiffen their thoracic is because they get tired too. You start leaning forward, but then the weight's pulling you back, and then you're kind of stuck and you can't really rotate. Your thoracic spine's meant to rotate, right? If you're in this stiff position for a really long time, your body's like, we don't know where to go. We're really uncomfortable. A lot of hikers get this like tendon pain around their patellas. And they're like, why do my knees hurt? Well, because all the load is now going downhill to the next large joint, which is the knees.
Yeah. All right. So where does the 20% pack rule fall into? Is it a myth? Meh. Or a must do?
It's not a myth. I think there is some validity. Someone somewhere found this number. So I think it depends. If you don't know where to start, it's a good baseline. If I don't know how heavy my bag should be or how light, that's probably a good number. If you're a beginner, lighter is always better. But once you're more experienced, like that number is more based on feel than it is something you got to be married to.
So it was really great to have you on today. Thank you so much for coming. I had a blast, and I'll hopefully see you next time. So if there's anybody who wants to follow you along, where can they get your information?
I'm on LinkedIn, Dr. Aaron Lee. My Instagram is aaronlee.pt. It's the training lab at traininglab.pt as well. We have a grand opening coming up. If you're in Colorado, you can pop by May 29th, 5 p.m.
Now that the pros have weighed in, we've analyzed all the data and put all the pieces together. What do I think? For me, it's also a myth, but with a few really key caveats here. Just because it's a myth doesn't mean you can just go buck wild with your pack weight. A 30% rule is more realistic for people who fall into that gray area and, frankly, more of a must-do because it's backed by multiple studies. Going beyond 20% of your total weight for the weight of your pack isn't going to make or break your life. But sticking to a rigid percentage to use as a goalpost is not a bad idea either, especially if you're newer to the sport or you're the kind of person that needs containment to make decisions with your kit. However, hiking with poles is going to make any amount of weight on your back feel 20% better. Trust me, I never leave home without mine when I backpack. Instead of constantly obsessing over your pack weight, you are much better off obsessing over your fitness, both your cardio and your skeletal muscular system. However, we haven't gotten to that one thing that Aaron brought up that might just revolutionize the way you backpack. This one piece of information really has stuck with me, and something I have never considered in my 20 years as a backpacker.
When I was a kid, if you had a really low hanging backpack, after a while you're like, this is really heavy. And then if you were like, all right, I'm just going to actually pull it up a little bit higher and let it sit in the middle of my back, wow, I can actually get through my day a little bit more. So if we want to talk about the physics of it, think of your spine as the pivot or the axis and your center of mass being that middle point of the seesaw. For the male anatomy, it tends to sit a little bit higher, a little bit above the navel. Obviously, it depends on body weight and height. And then for the female anatomy, it's a little bit lower because we have wider hips. Based on that, typically you want to have the heaviest load close to the center of mass, because if you think about lever arms, the further away it is from the axis, even if it's the same weight, now you have weight plus distance. That is a bigger force on your body. And that's the difference for the male body and the female body, is it probably is going to sit a little bit lower for the female and is a little bit higher for the male.
Okay. This is really fascinating because how backpackers tend to load their packs is they tend to put their sleep system towards the bottom. Now, hearing this advice and hearing what you're saying is they say to put the softest stuff at the bottom and then load your heavy things. So the heavy things are sitting on top of the soft stuff. And if I'm hearing you correctly, that would be for a male body, right? Because their center of gravity is going to be a bit higher. Hold up. You're telling me the way that I've been told to pack as a female backpacker could actually be wrong. Whoa. I've got a lot to say about this topic. So you're going to want to be sure to check out my next mini-sode where I do a head-to-head test comparing packing your heaviest items at the bottom versus the middle third of my pack. And I can't wait to show you the results.